Hello, my stars, and welcome back to my channel. I am Basil, and today I am reading chapter 4 of Show Us Who You Are. Chapter 4 is called The Aftermath. Here's the summary. The title says it. The presentation is over. Time to see the reactions to it. Izuku stood there motionless, but his thoughts were running. Oh dear gods, what have I done? I just told them. They know that I was quirkless. They know. It's going to be just like middle school, isn't it? All my friends will turn their backs on me and I'll be alone again. Just a useless, worthless, pathetic freak with its creepy stalker notebooks and warm but bony arms wrapped themselves around him as he was pulled against a light chest. Oh, my boy. A deep, warm voice whispered somewhere above his ear. The person holding him shifted, buried their face in his unruly curls, and warm breath tickled his neck. I'm so sorry you had to go through all this. So incredibly sorry. Please forgive me that I wasn't there to save you. I should have been your hero, but I failed you. I'm sorry. All Might? Izuku whispered. Yes, my boy. I'm here now. And to the teen's utmost horror, he felt little droplets fall on his face, mingling with the tears that were still streaming over his cheeks. All Might was crying. He was crying because of him. No, young Midoriya, not because of you. For you. Oh, did I say that out loud? All Might chuckled, lowly and wetly. Yeah, yes you did. And it's alright. Oh. And suddenly his throat felt too tight as a strangled sob made his way out of his mouth, and Izuku broke down. He slung his arms around his hero, his idol, and buried his face in his chest, his hand gripping at the tall man's shirt until his knuckles turned white. And he cried, loud and messily, tears and snot mixing on his face and staining All Might's shirt. He would feel embarrassed about dirtying it, but right now he couldn't think about anything else than how much it had hurt all these years, and how good it felt to finally be supported by someone else than his mother. Being supported by All Might, not just by watching his videos on HeroTube, but having him here, in person, holding him in a secure embrace, as if he would never allow anyone to hurt him ever again. And even though All Might wasn't the larger-than-life #1 hero he once was anymore, Izuku still felt so incredibly safe in his arms. The green net couldn't do anything else than bury his face deeper into his mentor's bony chest and try to breathe. Even though his tears and violent sobs made it hard for him. But he managed, and slowly he tuned other noises back in, hearing a sniffling from somewhere behind All Might's back, probably Yamada-sensei and Howl Dog's low growling, and heard sobbing from the direction of his classmates too. Suddenly, another warm hand landed on his shoulder, and when Izuku glanced sideways, he could make out Hitoshi, patting his back awkwardly. He clearly was out of his depth, but still wanted to comfort his presentation partner. The realization made Izuku tear up even more. Soon enough, however, Hitoshi's hand was replaced by another set of arms, one warm, one cold, wrapping themselves around his middle. You've been so brave. I'm so glad you're here, with us, with me. Shouto whispered in his ear, a slight crack in his voice that the green-net-haired boy never heard before. But before Izuku could overthink what that meant, Shouto squeezed him a little bit harder and laid his chin on top of his shoulder, relaxing his own shoulders in the process. He was clearly content to stand there like that for however long it would take for Izuku to calm down, which paradoxically made him cry even harder. After a few more minutes, his erratic breathing evened out again, and his sobs subsided enough that he could hear a low, tentative voice. Deku? Izuku lifted his head from All Might's chest and pushed back a little against Shouto, so the latter would give him some space, and nearly smiling at his friend's soft accompanying whine, and looked over to Uraraka, who stood halfway between her desk and his current position, as if she started to walk towards him and stopped in the middle. A few other classmates, Iida, Tsuyu, Kirishima, were also standing and looked about ready to sprint at him. Instinctively, Izuku tensed and his eyes roamed over the windows and the door, making sure that his escape routes were still accessible. If he could slip out of All Might's and Shoto's embrace fast enough, that is. But they wouldn't hold him back if his classmates attacked him, right? Never. A small part of his brain stated, they'd never hurt you, they'd protect you. And the Greenette didn't know where this thought came from, but somehow it felt true. His mentor and his best friend, they were safe. He could trust them, just like he could trust Aizawa sensei, who even protected him from Kachan at the first day of school, even though no other teacher before had ever bothered to do that. With this realization, Izuku looked back at Uraraka. The girl's voice sounded heavy with unshed tears as she asked, Deku, did all of this really happen to you? I mean, I don't think you would lie or something, but. And the green haired teen understood. No, she didn't believe he lied, but she wished it wasn't true. She wished he didn't go through all this, but he had to. So she nodded, unable to form any words. His friend pressed her hand to her mouth. With force, she suddenly threw herself forward until she bumped into him, nearly knocking him off his feet as she tackled him in a bone-crushing hug. I'm sorry, she sobbed. It's not your fault. Izuku breathed out, closing his eyes in a futile attempt to regain his own tears. I'm fine now. You're not fine, Shouta disagreed. And that's perfectly fine. You have the right not to be fine. The dual-colored hair boy continued to murmur, sweet nothingness and reassurances, while the rest of his classmates slowly came closer, crowding around them and finally joining the hug until the whole class was just one big mess of heavy, wet breaths and tangled arms. Izuku stood at the center, surrounded by his mentor and friends, and the warmth in their kind words. Oh, he wasn't alone anymore, was he? Even though they knew that he used to be corkless, they still comforted him, were still there for him. Warmth spread throughout his chest. After a few minutes, they let go of the group hug. Most of the class went to grab some chairs, but the so-called Deku Squad just sat down on the ground, circling Izuku, who leaned against the forefront of the teacher's podium. Shouto still had an arm slung over his friend's shoulders, and Uraraka held his hand in a death grip. Problem child. Aizawa called while the students all got seated. The gruff man stood next to the podium, staring down at his students and looking stoic as ever, but his eyes betrayed his concern. Are you all right to continue? If you need a minute or don't want to talk anymore about it today, that's fine. You don't have to push yourself. Thank you, Sensei. But I'm fine to talk, I mean. Fine, but if that changes, we will stop any time. The man then looked up and addressed the rest of his students as well. I know that's a lot to stomach for all of you. I know that this assignment may have brought up some bad memories for you. And knowing how your classmates have been treated, it's probably a shock to you all. So, if you need to step up, you're always welcome to do so. I always want to make sure that you know you don't have to deal with this alone. He gestured to the teachers still sitting along the wall. You can talk to any of us teachers, but for more severe issues, I'd recommend you talk with Hound Dog, since he's the school counselor. Getting help for mental issues is no sign of weakness. I want to be absolutely clear on this. Almost every pro hero sees a therapist regularly, or has seen one at some point during their career. There's not shame in that. It's only logical to get help if you need it, just like you would go to a hospital if you broke something. So please, don't hesitate to come forward to one of us. After this uncharacteristically long speech, their homeroom teacher gestured to Izuku, signaling him to continue. The green-eyed nodded and addressed the class. Well, I guess you have some questions. There was a beat of silence before Iida spoke up, a little softer than he usually would. It's not a question, but I wanted to thank you for telling us. I think I can speak in the name of the whole class when I say we were honored to have your trust. He's right, Gero. Suyu added, but why did you decide to tell us? You could have held this presentation without mentioning your personal involvement. Yeah, I guess I could have, but I wanted to tell you because growing up like this it was hard. Sometimes I didn't even know why I kept on living. And it's still impacting me, obviously. All my life I pretended to be fine, and when I got into UA, I just kept pretending. And it was fine for a while, but now I have friends now, and the whole class is closer to me than any of my former classmates were. And my pretending started to feel less like a way to survive, but more like I'm deceiving you. There's so much I kept from you, and you probably all have a picture of me that is far from the truth. So I basically just I wanted to be honest with you. The hero Deku, who always smiles, is more than a farce than anything. I'm sorry if that disappoints you. We could never be disappointed with you, Deku! Uraraka immediately cried, and Iida nodded his head vigorously. Yes, indeed, the class rep added, chopping the air with his hand. On the contrary, all your accomplishments are even more impressive now. You've had your quirk for not even a year, and you're still able to keep up with the rest of your classmates, all of whom had their quirks for more than 10 years. And you not only keep up, but you're one of the best in heroics. We should strive to live up to the example you are setting. Izuku looked at its friends with big, watery eyes, another choked sob ripping from his throat. You you really think so? Of course, Ida responded, nearly hitting Suyu in the face with his moving arm. Yeah, that's so manly. Kirishima shouted from his seat, and others also expressed their agreement. Sure thing, Mito bro. Yes, Gero. Absolutely, you're the real deal, Midori. Why would we want anything else? Of course, kiddo, you're rockin'. Izuku looked over at his English teacher, who sent him an encouraging smile despite his red-rimmed eyes. Once again, the boy was overwhelmed by how different the teachers at UA were. Even though they knew about his former quirk status, they didn't turn at him or punish him. They still supported him. It was nearly an incomprehensible concept for him. So, Kaminari piped up next. That teacher you mentioned in the presentation. The blonde didn't finish his sentence. Izuku gulped, but after a deep breath and an encouraging squeeze of his hand from Shouto, he felt as ready as he would ever to talk about that topic. Yes, he really touched me and made me touch him. Breathe, Izuku. In 2, 3. Hold 2, 3. Out 2, 3. Just keep on breathing. It was gross. I felt so gross. But I wanted to apply to UA, and he said he'd put a black mark on my record if I didn't do what he wanted, or if I told anyone about it. I was scared. UA is one of the only high schools that allowed quirkless people to even apply, and even though it was highly unlikely that I'd make it into the hero course, UA's Gen Education course had a good reputation. It would have been my only chance to get a higher education. I couldn't risk losing that, so I just let it happen, I guess. You never told anybody? Yaoyorozu asked, clearly looking uncomfortable. I tried once. I went to the police station, but as soon as they saw my court status, the officer told me to get lost before he would arrest me for false accusations. That's fucked up. Zero murmured. So this teacher was never punished for his actions? Izuku asked incredulously. Not yet. The principal interrupted calmly before Izuku could do more than open his mouth. The stove, and yes, Izuku was quite sure that the furry principal was mostly Stowe, walked over to the deck squad, whose members were still sitting in a circle on the ground. He stopped once he stood next to the green-haired child and lay a paw on his shoulder. After Aizawa informed me of your talk last Thursday, I started to investigate your junior high and middle school. I gained access to security footage and ran a face recognition program through it and all of the incidents you were involved in. His beady eyes stared straight into emerald green ones, conveying his seriousness. I just finished to view them all this morning, and I was shocked, to say the least. This school will be closed and the teachers arrested by the end of the week. That I can promise you. No other child will ever have to go suffer from the hands of these teachers ever again. He spat the word teachers as if completely shell-shocked. You investigated Aldera? He whispered unbelievingly. Why, of course! The principal chirped, a creepy smile on his furry face. They'll all get the right punishment they deserve. Thank you! Izuku sobbed, another wave of tears stinging in his eyes. No need to thank me, young man. As an educator, and even more as a hero, it's my duty to rectify such injustice. And it's really that bad that the teachers need to be arrested? Yamada-sensei asked. A shadow filtered over his boss's expression as he nodded solemnly. Shit. The teacher cursed in English and stroked his mustache with his thumb and pointer finger repeatedly in a nervous gesture. But wait a second. Jiro suddenly spoke up. Didn't you go to school with Bakugo before UA? Deathly silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to the ash-blonde boy who'd been uncharacteristically silent for the last few minutes. Even now, he was just sitting on his desk and staring down at his hands on the tabletop. Baku, bro? Kirishima asked tentatively. The blonde scowled like usual, but didn't otherwise react to being addressed. Baku, bro, please, tell me you did something to help Mido, bro. Why would he? Shouto asked, loud and clear, his voice even colder than his ice. After all. Don't! Izuku interrupted him and looked at him with wide, pleading eyes. Please, it's not. He shook his head, a sad smile on his face. It's not important anymore. You're still scared of him. Shouto glared at him, but the greenette could see the worry in his eyes. Why would he be scared? Kirishima asked, his voice thin and brittle. Bakuguro always wanted to be a hero. He must have helped him. Right? Right? Shut the fuck up, shitty hair. Katsuki finally screamed, small explosions popping in his hands. What the heck do you want to hear, huh? That I didn't help him. I never even lifted a single fucking finger to help him, and you know why? Because I was too busy making his life miserable, fucking busy with taunting him and pushing him around and destroying his worksheets and shit, and... Gotcha! Izuku called out desperately. The ash-blonde teen turned to him, staring at him with wide eyes, breathing heavily. It's alright, it wasn't your fault, and it's not like that anymore. I know you've changed, or at least trying. It's all different now. Is it? Really? Nezu suddenly asked. Izuku flinched. He had already forgotten that the principal still stood next to him and Shouto. attacked you with unnecessary force while here at UA? Well, it was just training, and in no situation. Let me think. Maybe during the end of the term exams, where he hit you in the face hard enough to break your cheekbone because you dared to mention that fighting All Might head on probably wasn't the best idea. Nobody said anything about it. Aizawa Sensei never mentioned it. Why were you alright with it then and not anymore? You are right. We only watched the actual exam, and because it happened in the preparation time, we didn't notice it at the time. I'm very sorry for this oversight. I apologize. At that, the principal bowed his head low to Izuku. It was the second teacher, even the principal, now who bowed to him in the second course in the course of a single week. It was really strange after years of teachers ignoring him and belating him. For now, they suddenly apologized to him. And Nezu wasn't finished. We as UA failed you, Midoriya. We failed to make this school a place for you where you can feel safe, and for that I am truly sorry. I will do whatever is necessary to change that, if that means that Bakugo can no longer stay a part of this class. Then that's what will happen. No! Izuku immediately cried out, You can't expel him! He wanted to be a hero and it's not his fault. All the teachers in middle school and junior high never did anything to help Kajan get better. Very well. Indeed, in my opinion, Bakugo is not solely to blame for his behavior. Although, he should be old enough to know right from wrong. However, we also failed to take action. Bakugo would have needed a lot more guidance than we provided for him so far, which will be rectified right away. He turned his blank gaze to Akatsuki. I will sign you up for mandatory anger management sessions with Hound Dog to learn how to keep yourself in check. Also, you'll have to attend therapy since I suspect that might be some deeper rooted issues causing your behavior that you need to work on. However, you won't be able to do therapy with Hound Dog, too, since that would pose a conflict for a school counselor. Of course, I'll contact your parents and work something out with them. You'll have UA's full support as long as you put in the effort to try and get better. Katsuki just stared at the mammal, and then he nodded courteously and lowered his head gaze again. He didn't even glance at his friends and classmates, probably not wanting to see the expressions on their faces. And when Izuku did that, he could really understand why. Shock, horror, anger, and resent showed on all of their faces. So, Mina sounded uncharacteristically hesitant and sad. Bakugo really was Midoriya's bully? Did he apologize? Hitoshi suddenly asked. Did he ever apologize to you for what he did? No? It was more like a question than like a statement. The purple-haired teen huffed angrily, crossing his arms over his chest, and Shouto pulled Izuku a little closer to his side, glaring daggers at Katsuki. It's alright. I'm sure if he had proper help, he will, and he will mean it. Right now, he couldn't mean it. Not really. Izuku looked over the self-proclaimed Baku squad, meeting each other's gazes. Please, don't stop being his friend. He's already doing better. He'll need your help to become a better person. So please, help him. They all looked conflicted, but Kirishima finally spoke up. Alright, but you have to promise to tell us if you're feeling unsafe or anything. And you! He turned to Katsuki. You'll do anything necessary to be a better person. I'm not friends with bullies, so you need proof that you aren't one anymore. Or so the gods help me, I will kick your ass right out of this class. Katsuki's eyes widened. He looked up at his friend, gulped, and finally nodded. Yeah, he croaked. I can do that. I'm going to do that. Very well. The principal clapped his paws and smiled gleefully. I think that was quite enough for today. I'd recommend you all to go back to your dorms. Go watch a movie marathon or something. Aizawa Sensei drawled. I'll come by later. All Might stay with the kids. Of course, Aizawa. He walked over to Izuku and offered him his hand and a kind smile. Let's go, my boy. What movies would you like to watch? Slowly, the whole class got up and left. Izuku sandwiched between All Might and Shouto, Iida, Uraraka, and Hitoshi walking behind them. It made the green net feel safe and protected. He threw a look over his shoulder and saw that the rest of the class following them. Their faces still showed how affected they were by everything that was revealed this afternoon. The last one to follow was Katsuki, his friends walking a few steps in front of him. Izuku furrowed his brow. He didn't want the blonde to lose all his friends. He really needed their support. And they were good people. They already helped him so much. His heart clenched at the thought that he might have ruined their friendship enough to nearly make him cry again. But he pushed the tears back. He cried enough today. Already more tears wouldn't help anyone with anything. He was pulled out of his mushing when All Might laid a large hand on his shoulder and asked him for his opinion on the fight Hawks had this morning with a villain with a pretty nasty wind quirk, which wasn't a good matchup for a hero with wings, although Hawks handled the situation very well, letting some of his feathers stray away and hiding under cards until they were in the villain's back, and could attack him before he could even notice them. It reminded Izuku of a fight a few months back when, as Izuku fully went into his mumble mode, he could finally relax a little, and the tension speeded out of his shoulders with every step they made. Shouta sighed deeply when he pushed the door to the teacher's lounge open, immediately making a beeline for the coffee machine in the corner. He knew this afternoon would be exhausting, but dear gods, how could the world fail a child like that? And if it was hard enough to hear for him, a seasoned pro hero, even an underground one, who was already aware of all the topics Shinsou and Midoriya were going to talk about, and then how hard it must be it had hit the rest of his students. He poured himself a cup of coffee and gulped it down in one go. He set the mug down in the sink, but before he could make a move to wash it, or rather turn around and leave it for someone else, cough, Hizashi, cough, to wash it, two strong, familiar arms wrapped themselves around his waist. Poor little listener. Hizashi sniffed slightly, muffled, hiding his face in Shota's neck. The scent of his husband, a mix of cat, coffee, and his own scent, always helped calm him down, and the underground hero was usually more than ready to provide his love with whatever he needed to feel better, even if it was just staying still and let himself be breathed in deeply. Although standing still definitely wasn't as appealing as turning around and giving Zashi a proper hug. So that's what he did. Hizashi took a step back and listened to his embrace to give Shouta more room to move, but tightened his arms again immediately after the dark-haired man faced him. Shouta slung his own arms around the blonde, pressing him into his chest until there wasn't even a millimeter of space between them. Hizashi had taken his speaker off when he entered the teacher's lounge, giving Shouta the chance to bury his own face in his neck now, too, for a while. A minute, a year, a lifetime. He could never bother to keep track of the time when he was so close to the love of his life. They just stood there and held each other, finding comfort in each other's strong embrace. We're helping him now. Shouta murmured lowly. He's not alone, and therapy will help him. I know, I'm just... When he asked me to play the role of the degenerate teacher, it hurts so much to know that he had to go through that he endured it to have a chance to apply to UA. It makes me so angry and sad. And he took a deep breath, stuttering breath. Shouta leaned back to look into teary, light green eyes. He wished Zashi wouldn't wear his hair up in the ridiculous cockatoo style right now. He'd love to bury his hands in these golden, silky strands and combing through them in a slow, steady rhythm that calmed them both. We'll make sure this never happens to any other student. This man will rot in prison for what he did, and Midoriya will get all the help he needs from Hound Dog, from Nezu, from all his friends, from us. Yeah, don't forget us, Zashi insisted. We'll be there for our little listener. I know he has his mother to care for him, but he lives in the dorms, and now there's no one else to fill that space momentarily. He rambled. Hizashi, of course we will be there for him. But please remember that we are not his parents. And if there's an open spot for a father figure, you'll have to battle Yagi for that position first. He smirked. True, the blonde replied, laughing a little at himself. And I don't think I could hit All Might. He's too much of my teen idol for that. Oh, you shouldn't underestimate Yagi just because he can't hold his muscle form anymore. Nezu piped up happily. When the two men turned around, they saw the mammal sitting on one of the couches next to Hound Dog, dangling his short legs and sipping a cup of tea. Neither of them knew where he got it, seeing as they stood right next to the front of the sink in the little kitchenette, the only place in the room where somebody could make tea. However, I don't think there will be a reason to fight. I'm sure there's enough of Midoriya for everybody. If Todoroki is willing to share his boyfriend, that is. Zashi added and laughed again. They're not boyfriends. Shouta deadpanned. Shouta, you've seen the little listeners. They're totally crushing on each other. And Todoroki won't pass up the opportunity to be there for him. And we both know how that can get two pining people together, don't we? He asked teasingly. Shouta buried the lower half of his face in his capture weapon, but it was not enough to completely hide the blush on his cheeks. It was true. Hizashi and himself had been crushing on each other since their first year sports festival, but both of them were too afraid to make the first move. Then Oboro died, and Hizashi successfully blocked all of Shota's attempts to withdraw back into his shell, forcing him to talk about his feelings and rely on his friends. Talks became just sitting in comfortable silence, became a first date, became a first kiss, and the rest was history. Shouta would never stop being grateful for everything Hizashi had done for him, and continued to do every day, for all the love he got and all the love he was allowed to give. But still, I'm not dealing with teenage hormones fluttering around in my homeroom, and even less in the dorms. They are not boyfriends, and they are not allowed to date until they graduate. Hizashi shamelessly laughed in his face, and even Nezu and Umi snickered from the couch. But Shouta stood by it. He was paid to make them good heroes, not to stop them from sneaking into each other's dorm rooms and indulge in what Iida would call inappropriate behavior. Damn it. Well, be that as it may, Nezu spoke up after they all composed themselves again. I think there are a few issues we need to address. As you know, Aizawa, I'm already in contact with Detective Tsukuachi regarding the Aldera School District. Midoriya will have to give a statement at some point, but there's enough time for him to also sort through his emotions beforehand. I'd also like to talk with his mother. Even though it sounded like there wasn't any abuse coming from her, I'd like to be sure. We already failed this boy enough, and I'm not ready to let anything else slip. Also, we'll have to talk more about Bakugo and his punishments, as well as his requirements to stay in your class. Uni, I'd ask you to talk to Midoriya about it, to try to figure out if he is really fine with staying, or if the thought is just stemmed from the lacking sense of self-worth. He clapped his paws. There is so much to do. Let's get started, he said cheerfully, and all the other teachers in the room nodded and took a seat as well. There were a lot of details to discuss, decisions to make, and meetings to set up. It was meant that Shota's life was about to get even more pressing in the near future. But when he thought about his green-haired student, his problem child, it was more than worth it. Epilogue. It was Saturday, 3.5 weeks after the presentation, that changed so much for Izuku. Starting with a very tearful talk with his mother that left them both a sobbing mess. He had to promise to never hide things like that from her ever again, and he intended to keep it. Contrary to his fears, his classmates took his reveal very well, accepting his former corklessness without a problem. Of course, there were little hitches every now and then, For example, when Momo would sometimes suddenly stop speaking in the middle of a sentence, afraid to hurt Izuku's feelings, or when some of his classmates tried to help him with things he usually didn't need help with, and he was left all teary eyed, feeling weak. And even though his brain told him that they only tried to be nice, however, it was nothing an open-hearted discussion of what was appropriate behavior around clerkless people or false negative, namely to behave like usual, you dorks, couldn't fix. Katsuki had some rough weeks. His friends were a lot more distant than before, and the majority of the class tried to interact with him as well as possible. However, as the time went on, they saw that he tried. He started regular anger management and therapy sessions, which of course would have time to show effect. But it was a first step in the right direction. The teacher looked far more closely on his behavior during class, and he calmed down noticeably. Of course, he was still abrasive and brash, but they all could see the effort he put into trying to regain his temper in. He wasn't forgiven, neither by the class nor by Izuku. Not by a long shot. But as Aizawa sensei would say, the chances of that happening were not zero. So the Greenette kept his hopes up. Izuku himself had spent the last weeks talking a lot about his emotions, something he absolutely wasn't used to. Of course, he spoke with Hound Dog about everything else. Anything else would completely undermine the idea of going into therapy. But also, his friends had made it their mission to get him to talk. Iida started to join in on his morning runs sometimes, always using the chance to ask how he was doing. Uraraka gave him hugs every chance he could, and whenever he looked only slightly down, she asked him how he felt. Even Hitoshi started a few awkward attempts at talking about his feelings, though he looked like would rather be anywhere else doing anything else, even Aizawa Sensei's suicide sprints. The one that really succeeded in making him talk, however, was Shouto. The dual haired boy would barely ever leave Izuku's side. Whenever the Greenette went, he went too. The two boys spent hours sitting in either of their rooms, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they held deep conversations that left tear tracks on their cheeks. Sometimes they discussed quirks. Or Izuku listened to the newest conspiracy theory. Clearly, Shoji had to be Beth Genius' secret love child, since they both always covered their mouths. As the day passed, they started to sometimes just sit in silence, reading or doing homework, or, in Yuzuku's case, quirk analysis. Neither of them felt the need to talk in these moments, both content to just share the space with the other and have them here. This Saturday, however, Shouto broke the silence. In the early afternoon, the two teens sat in Izuku's room, Shouto reading a book and his friend scribbling in one of his notebooks, until Shouto spoke up. There's a new cat cafe not far from here. Do you want to go with me? Hmm? Izuku looked up, still a little lost in thought. Oh, yeah, that would be nice. When do you want to go? Right now. Right now? Izuku stared at him with wide eyes. But we need to ask Aizawa sensei if we are allowed to leave campus, and I already asked him. Oh. Izuku blinked at his friend, not sure what to say anymore. Shouto stared back, stone faced. All right then. You want to go with me? Izuku beamed. Yes, of course, if we're allowed to. It's always nice to hang out with friends. We should ask Iida and Uraraka if they want to tag along. No. Took a deep breath, and suddenly he looked nervous. I want to go only with you, like on a date. Izuku's brain blue screened. What? I don't want to hang out like friends. I tried to ask you out on a date. So, would you go on one date with me? The longer he took to answer, the more nervous Shouto looked, until he averted his eyes and murmured, I guess that's a no. That was what pulled Izuku out of his stupor. No! He practically screamed. No, I do want to go on a date with you. You do? The green-haired boy couldn't contain his wide smile. Of course I do. Shouto smiled back just as wide. It's a date then. It's a date. So on their date they went. The cat cafe was small and cozy, and the coffee delicious. The boys sat down in a booth in the corner, and let all the felines climb all over them while they sipped their hot drinks and chatted amicably. At one point, Izuku laughed so hard that he nearly fell from his seat, which upset the orange tabby cat sitting on his shoulder at the time greatly. They had to bribe her with cat treats Shouto brought at the counter to make her come back afterwards. When they left the cafe and headed back to their dorms, they were both smiling. Before they reached High Alliance, Shouto suddenly stopped in his tracks and grabbed Izuku's hand to hold him back too. What's wrong, Shouto? Izuku asked worriedly. Nothing, the other boy responded hesitantly. Just. He grabbed Izuku's hand and pulled him forward so that they stood opposite and pretty close to each other. Shouto, what? He couldn't finish his question as Shouto leaned slowly forward and brushed his lips against Izuku's. He pulled back a little to shoot the brunette a quick, assessing glance, and then he leaned back in and pressed his mouth more firmly against the other boy's. Izuku didn't know what happened to him. It was just a gentle press of the lips on his, but it made his heart race and his knees weaken. Warmth pulled in his stomach, fluttering upwards into his chest and creeping through his whole body. He didn't know why his body reacted like that, but he didn't want it to stop. So when Shouto pulled back again, it was him who followed the retreating lips to catch them again in another kiss, his hand simultaneously reaching out to land on Shouto's hips and pull him closer. In the end, they couldn't tell how long they just stood there sharing gentle kisses. But really, time was such an abstract concept when you could get lost in the person you cared so deeply for. How could it matter in a moment like that? When they finally separated, they smiled shyly at each other. Izuku grabbed Shouto's hand and held it tightly while they walked to the last 50 meters to their dorm building. To Izuku, it felt like fate, as if their story was already written and they had to follow the paths laying out in front of them. Long talks turned into time silently spent together. Silence turned into a first date, a date into a perfect first kiss. He wondered what more would wait for them. He couldn't wait to see. Alright, my stars, that is the end of that video. This is the end of this whole series. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I know I have. This is one of my favorites to look back on. I love how it really digs deep into what Izuku Midoriya's past in middle school would have been that we didn't fully see. How it would be kind of more serious if we just had a little more look at how Porco's people were treated. It gives us a more bigger and larger perspective to look at, because it kind of intertwines with the real life, with the ostracizing and this, oh my god, I forgot the word. Oh my god. See, this is what happens when I'm not reading. I forget simple words. Oh my god. Being bilingual does not help. But all the disagreements that happen, all the discrimination, there we go, that happens in real life can be really seen in My Hero, and this fic really shows it. How people who might be seen as weaker or less knowledgeable at all, like how some people are in real life, would be treated differently just to get to the same place as the others are. I really love this fic. I love how in the end it's all fluff and it's not sad as it was in the beginning as much. I really love it, and I also hope that you love it. in that you will go to AO3 to leave kudos on the work if you haven't done so already. The fic link is always in the description below, so you can always go check that out. If you guys have any other recommendations you would like me to podfic, you can put them down in the comments below. If you have any thoughts and feelings on this fic, you can also put them down in the comments below. I always love to see what you guys have to say, and I hopefully always have a reply to it. My Discord server is in the description below, as well as all my other socials. I hope to see you in the next one, my stars. Take care of yourselves, sleep well, eat, and I hope to see you in the next ones. Bye, my stars.